remarks.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and welcome everyone. It's great to see everybody here, and again to our fourth meeting. As you're all aware, the Commission, the Land Conservation and Development Commission, is continuously briefed on this process, the project, the progress we're making, and remains very, very supportive of where we're at and where we're going. It's my pleasure today to also welcome our chair, Robin MacArthur, who is joining us today in a listen mode. She wants to help ensure that we have implementable rules that the Commission can adopt at the end of this RAC process as smoothly as possible. And I will say that I really appreciate Chair MacArthur being here and listening and assisting, as myself and my co-liaison, Commissioner Stuart Warren, are both still relatively new to the Commission and are both serving as liaisons to our first RAC. So we really appreciate Chair MacArthur's help and support throughout this process. A couple of quick points. One, a note about terminology. We have received some feedback that our language is not as appreciative or as positive as it should be. And the first thing I want to say is thank you for providing the feedback. That's so important, and we really, really appreciate it. DLCD, the department, internally uses the term priority populations, as BIPOC and our other priority populations are very important to all of us. We care about these community members and admire their resilience in the face of historical marginalization. While we have used the term, and quote again, historically marginalized in administrative rules and in draft rules to align with the evolving federal language, and evolving demonstrates that it continues to change, and we're tracking that very closely. As it continues to change, let us all remember this is a situation where we're actively working to correct the language. We want to get it right. Priority populations are to be uplifted, celebrated, and listened to. And we thank each RAC member for working to understand these nuances and change our language and behavior accordingly. It is so important, and the actions, we're tracking it as closely as we possibly can, and we're doing everything we can to get it right. I want to shift gears and Kirsten, I'm not sure if somebody on staff is going to pull up a slide here to kind of show where we are in this process. And I know each meeting we have kind of a check-in of the rulemaking process, but we thought this slide might be helpful to provide just a big picture context. We wanted to show the upstream and kind of downstream graphic to reflect where different actions occur. The book ended on the one side by kind of the federal context in which everything that we are doing falls within on the one end, and on the other end, the benefits and outcomes we aim to achieve, from reducing climate pollution, combating natural disasters, benefits to public health, equity, thriving economies, and so much more on the other side of the screen. There's so much that we're working to achieve through this process. We, of course, are at the state level. So the column there where it says state rules, policies, that's where we're at with developing these new administrative rules. And while these rules will be implemented by local governments, which is the next column, cities and local decisions, we don't control the individual actions to reduce climate change, which is the next one, the household choices. So just to give some context of kind of where we're at and where we're going in our work, our role in local government is to make a range of choices possible for the household choices that you see. We will include this graphic in the post-meeting summary and hope it's helpful for everybody, just to, again, to put into context all of our work. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to provide some opening remarks. I would like to just see if my co-liaison, Commissioner Warren, who will close us out today, if you have anything that you wanted to share at the outset of the meeting, or if you'd like me to go ahead and turn it back over to Sylvia.
Thank you, Commissioner Lilac. I think we can just turn it right back over to Sylvia from here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So Sylvia, back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. All right, so I'll just spend a couple of minutes here going over our kind of meeting purpose and agenda and just some reminders about our process. So today we have a big full meeting as usual. We're going to start with kind of a big picture overview of this climate-friendly and equitable communities process. Within the big picture, it can get confusing because there are lots of different processes, a lot of historical work that's been done. So just kind of providing some broader context to ground us a little bit. And then we're also going to spend a few minutes on the equitable outcomes. So we've brought this up at the past few RAC meetings, at every RAC meeting so far. And today DLCD staff will kind of provide a version that will be moving forward to be used as a guide and lens for the process. And they'll describe some of the next steps on that. And then a big part of our agenda today is really focusing on performance measures. So we want to talk about what's most important kind of to measure to make sure that we're meeting the equitable outcomes climate objectives that are outlined here. And during that process, during that conversation, we'll get into some breakout rooms and then come back and report out. We'll have a break and then get into a discussion on monitoring and reporting. And there we're going to use a couple of tools as well. We're actually going to throw all of the discussion tools at you today. We're going to have a poll question as well as using sort of a sticky note chat feature. So we're looking forward to using some different tools for discussion and getting input from you kind of both in small group meeting, large group meetings, written format, hoping that we can get your ideas in a number of different ways today. A couple of process reminders. You did receive a meeting packet prior to today that has a discussion questions worksheet. We just want to reiterate how important that is to help kind of guide your thinking prior to meetings. And after today, you'll also receive a link to a survey so that you can provide more of your thoughts on those discussion questions after today. And alternates are also welcome to provide their input on those discussion questions, and members of the public, your input is welcome through the email address, the dlcd.cfec@state.or.us email address. That's on all of the communications. So we appreciate you providing your input that way. And a reminder that we have the chat here mostly for troubleshooting issues. If you have any trouble, just send a message to the host, but we hope that all substantive conversation is kind of through your voices in the meeting. And this meeting is being recorded as a reminder and will be posted on the website. When we get to the discussion periods, we welcome you to use your raise your hand button to get your voice in the conversation so that we can manage this large group. And we also know this is a large chunk of your day. We will have a scheduled break, but please feel free to walk around, take care of yourself as needed. So I think with that, that's all of the introductory pieces that we have for the day. I will hand it over to Kevin Young with DLCD to just provide kind of that overview, big picture context for us.
Thank you, Sylvia. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you. A well-attended meeting, so thank you. I'm Kevin Young. I'm a member of the project team. And this part of the agenda is really in response to the survey results we got from the last meeting. From those results, it's pretty clear that we need to do a better job of explaining how all the pieces of what we've been talking about fit together. I'm going to take a few minutes to kind of explain the bigger picture process. I also want to reference the definition of terms document that's in your packets. I hope people have had a chance to look at that. Really what we're hoping to do is to build a shared understanding of the work before us. You've heard a lot of jargon, and so we want to make sure that we're building that shared understanding. So my presentation will be relatively brief, and then we'll have some time for question and answer and comment on any of that stuff. So yeah, so process overview. Let's go ahead. Next slide, Bill. All right, so this really shows us, and as you know, I think everyone knows now, the effort began with the statewide transportation strategy. Then more recently, our piece of it is within the Every Mile Counts program. But even within that program, the work we're doing is the climate friendly and equitable communities piece of that. And I'll go into that in a little more detail here on the next slide. Go ahead, Bill. So first of all, big picture, in 2007, the legislature adopted an overall greenhouse gas reduction goal for the state to reduce emissions to 75% below 1990 levels by 2050 for all sectors. So that's all the carbon generators, not just transportation. So 75% below 1990 levels by 2050. That's the big picture target we're shooting for. In 2013, the Oregon Department of Transportation developed the statewide transportation strategy, the STS, you've heard us refer to it as. This defines a path to meet the overall state reduction goal for the transportation sector. All right, next. Then in 2011, the Land Conservation and Development Commission adopted the Metropolitan Greenhouse Gas Reduction Target Rules. So those live in Division 44. We've seen a draft of those rules already. That's where some of the rules we'll be working on live, but of course we're going to have some other areas that we're going to touch on as well. Nonetheless, within Division 44, the targets identify how much household transportation emissions would have to decrease to meet the state's reduction goal. And as you know, all of this is in response to the governor's executive order in 2020. So with that executive order, the Every Mile Counts program was developed, and we are one part of that. The Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking, what we're doing is one part of that effort, and it focuses on actions that may be taken by local governments. Because DLCD is about planning, we're largely talking about transportation and land use planning. And the actions that we're looking at are expanding transportation options and supporting land use practices that reduce reliance on the automobile, broadly speaking. We'll get down into more detail in a minute. Next slide, please. All right, so in 2018, there was an STS monitoring report that was conducted. It found we are not making sufficient progress towards our climate pollution reduction goals. And this graph shows you basically that difference. So the lower line, the dark line, is where we need to be based on that 75% reduction goal that I articulated earlier. So well below 1990 levels. The green line, I should say the lighter green line, shows our current path based on current trends. So some reduction, but not nearly where we need to be. And so as you can see, it's closing that gap that we are working towards. And this is related, this is in the sector of light duty vehicles. So it's one piece of the climate puzzle. It's not the whole enchilada, of course, but basically that is the focus.
And Kevin, I'm sorry, did you already say light duty is cars and just small trucks?
I did not.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Light duty vehicles being cars, trucks, I would assume motorcycles are probably included there as well, but not commercial vehicles, the kinds of vehicles that most people use on a day-to-day basis.
It's under 14,000 pounds.
Oh, I'm sorry, what's that?
Vehicles, it's defined as vehicles under 14,000 pounds.
Okay, under 14,000 pounds, thank you. And so, you know, in looking at this gap, it's a graphic, but really what we know is that climate change is happening. We're seeing wildfires, we're seeing ice storms, glaciers are retreating, we have ecosystems in stress. We need to act quickly. And so again, that we really need to underscore the importance of doing this work as quickly as we possibly can. But I think you all know that because that's why you're here. So in that context, I'd just like to provide a little bit of an overview of where we've been and where we're going. Could you go to the next slide, please, Bill? All right, so the first piece here is what we're familiar with. The work that we've been doing thus far is focusing on planning for climate reduction in metropolitan areas. So this relates to regional scenario planning and interim requirements. These are pretty, these terms aren't very intuitive. And so I'm going to attempt to break down scenario planning to some degree, but we'll have some time for question and answer later. But fundamentally, what scenario planning is in the context of the work we're doing, it's a decision-making process that allows local governments within a region to work together to evaluate the impacts of different actions or sets of actions. So a set of actions would be a scenario. And so multiple scenarios are considered, a set of actions that can be taken to reduce climate pollution. The goal of this process is to determine which set of actions will be best for each region in terms of achieving necessary climate pollution reductions and other community goals. So ultimately, our goal is for each of the 8 metropolitan regions in the state to develop a preferred scenario to reduce climate pollution. The preferred scenario will include shared regional goals that will cumulatively result in meeting the greenhouse gas reduction goal for each region. Scenario and regional goals will be used to establish performance measures for local implementation actions. And as we've discussed, we anticipate beginning regional scenario planning work in the near term with the Eugene, Springfield, and Salem-Keizer regions, with work in the remaining regions to occur later. In the interim, for regions waiting to begin the scenario planning process, the statewide transportation strategy has identified regional strategies and levels of ambition for the metropolitan areas that can be used in lieu of a regional scenario plan. These have been referred to as the interim requirements. Okay, so that's the piece that we have been working on. I hope that contextualizes it a little bit for people. But again, if you're still confused, hold on and we'll get to question and answer. The next piece is where we're going next. And so this is, why is it 1 and 2? Well, for logistical reasons, we started on 2, but we really need to go back to 1. And that is essentially land use and transportation planning requirements that will apply within these areas and will have results that are also impactful along with scenario planning. Next. So these actions work together. So the land use and transportation planning requirements, the scenario planning will all work towards producing results that will result in climate pollution reduction. And that's where performance monitoring and reporting comes in, so that we can see, is this working or do we need to make adjustments along the way? All right, next slide, please. All right, so here I just want to talk about where we're going. And so essentially this is from the charge from the commission. There are basically 6 actions within this package of strategies. And again, these are outside of this scenario planning. These are standards that we will be discussing and implementing, beginning with, of course, climate-friendly areas, where local governments will allow higher levels of mixed-use development and provide focused transportation investments. And then second, we also will be planning for high-quality pedestrian, bicycle, and transit infrastructure. That's fundamental to shift our way of thinking and our way of getting around from single-occupant vehicles to utilizing other modes. Third, limiting off-street minimum parking mandates is very important, particularly in climate-friendly areas where we can't have walkable mixed-use neighborhoods if there is a sea of parking lots. And so for a couple of, well, several reasons, limiting off-street parking mandates is an important piece of that puzzle. Next, limiting motor vehicle congestion standards. So what does that mean? That means that as local governments do, well, as not just local governments, as state and local governments look at transportation system function, traditionally, the measures of how well transportation systems are functioning have focused on how well vehicles are moving along the transportation network, typically single occupant vehicles. So they're going to look at congestion at intersections for those vehicles. What we need to do is to evolve our thinking to think about other modes of transportation and how well they're functioning. So pedestrians, bicyclists, transit, all of that, how well is that functioning? Because that is a very important piece of the puzzle as well. Next. So this item is to prioritize and select transportation projects to meet climate and equity goals. So in the past, the prioritization for transportation projects is what's going to work best to move vehicles along our street network, single occupant vehicles largely. what we have not been folding into those decisions about where we invest on transportation is what about our climate goals? What about the equitable impacts of that transportation, those transportation system improvements? So this is also a key consideration. And then lastly is supporting electric vehicle charging, another important component that we will need to fold in. So this is yet to be discussed, but I just want to make it clear this will be part of the ground we'll be covering, generally starting in June and then moving into the fall. So that's the overview of what the program is about. And at this point, if there are any questions or comments on what I've just said, or any of the definitions in the definition of terms document, this would be a good time to have that conversation.
Kevin, did you define mixed use areas?
No, I did not. Thank you. So yeah, you're right. That's a planning jargon term. So mixed use areas are kind of what we're used to seeing quite often in an old downtown area, where you have a combination of commercial and residential development and, public. You might have city hall, you might have a post office, you're going to have shops, you're going to have apartments, all of that together. And why that's important is it enables people to conduct more of their daily life within a walking or bicycle scale, or also readily served by transit. So that's what is meant by the term mixed use. Thank you, Kirsten.
Yeah.
I see
Thanks, Kevin.
couple other questions. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Oh, no, I was going to say thanks for explaining such an incredibly complex program in 10 minutes. But yeah, several hands up. So if anyone has questions or clarifications, feel free to raise your hand with just the little raise your hand icon in the platform. Let's go to Jana and then Mary, Kyle, and Amy. Jana? And reminder to just introduce yourself again as we're all getting to know each other.
Thank you. This is Jana Jarvis, Oregon Trucking. Thank you, Kevin. I just wanted, and I apologize because my meetings were running over and I signed on a little bit late, but when you're talking about your transportation factors here, you kept referencing congestion and those issues from the passenger vehicle standpoint. I'm curious to know what the implications are for commercial vehicles, for the medium duty and heavy duty. Is this part of this calculation at all? Or are we just looking strictly at passenger vehicle traffic? And
well, that's a good question, and I might not be the best person to answer that. I'll defer to other members of the team if somebody wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, Brian, you got it. Great.
This is Bill Holmstrom from DLCD staff. I think that's something definitely that's going to be an ongoing issue of discussion, especially between us and the Department of Transportation. I know Amanda and Brian are on right now, and if they have anything else to add, that's fine. But we're still working out the contours of how this is all going to work. And obviously, we want to make sure that whatever we end up with works well for ongoing, making sure that our commerce still moves and meets all of our goals for our economy, as well as the climate and equity.
well, and I appreciate that. But the reason I bring it up is not so much because you're not looking at Oregon's freeway network per se, but a lot of the state highways run through communities, and the impacts on road design and changes to road design are pretty integral to moving commercial vehicles and moving the economy. So I just want us to be cognizant that there's some implications here as well.
You bet. I think next up is Mary Kyle McCurdy.
Yes. Hi, Mary Kyle McCurdy with 1000 Friends of Oregon, she, her pronouns. Thanks, Kevin. I think that was really useful. I particularly liked kind of the nesting doll aspect of it, how things fit into one another. And I think it would be helpful, not necessarily right now, but like the next iteration of this would be to actually fill in some of the specifics from the documents that you mentioned that apply to the work we're doing. So you mentioned the ODOT's State Transportation Strategy, or the STS, which is a document that applies for greenhouse gas reductions from all transportation aspects around the state, but it has particular ones that are aimed at what we are doing here in the land use transportation sector. So I just called it up just to get an example, but it says, for example, the STS says meeting our greenhouse gas reduction targets from the transportation sector will take a variety of things, including steadily moving more people into compact mixed use areas, so that 30% of all households live in mixed use areas as compared to today. Today only statewide is 20%. So that's like a 50% increase to go from 20 to 30. That might not be the exact increase for every MPO community, but that's the order of magnitude we're talking about.
You
And it
bet.
has similar numbers for the transportation mode shift. So I think filling in those specifics to give an idea of the scope and scale of what we're talking about. And then I would add to yours another layer in there, the greenhouse gas reduction target that LCDC has adopted for each of the MPO areas, their greenhouse gas reduction targets per capita, because that's really the thing we're supposed to be meeting, or the local governments within the metropolitan regions should be meeting. And I don't think I saw that in there.
Mhm.
And then I think you mentioned, or else I've just been reading it so often I can't remember, the gap analysis between our plans today, our local plans today, and where we have to get. And the way they're described, I think you've already done some of those, at least a few years ago. So the department and ODOT have done a gap analysis for the Central Lane MPO as to where their plans get them today compared to where they need to go. It's a big gap. And also you've done it for, and these are a few years out of date for Corvallis and the Rogue Valley MPO. And then of course we already have Portland's, which is exceeding it. So I don't know if you're proposing updating that, if that is kind of the gap analysis you're talking about. But if that is, I think it would be good to know this is an example of the kind of gap analysis you're talking about, and then when that's going to happen and by who, because that's kind of the critical piece here. Where do we have to get? How close or how far are we? And
Yeah.
it's going to be a little bit different answer for each place. So anyway, it's just filling in those specifics so we get that idea of the scale of what it is we're talking about. Thanks.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you. And I'll just pause for a minute if any other member of the team wants to add anything. All right, I'll move on to the next question. Looks like Amy is up next.
Hello, this is Amy from the NAACP Eugene Springfield. I just had a clarifying question. You mentioned that the overall goal that we were going for was a 75% reduction by 1990, from 1990 levels by 2050, and I think the executive order has that as bumped that up to 80% reduction. So are we going with the less stringent target, or I just noticed that discrepancy?
I think that's a really good catch. No, I believe you're correct. I think the goal now is 80% based on the executive order. So thank you.
Thank you. And then the second question, well, I guess it's more of a suggestion, or maybe just kind of putting a bug in your ear. And I've spoken about this a little bit before and mentioned it in my responses in your surveys. But just thinking about how, like, as we're kind of scaling up e-mobility and renewable energy, I know like statewide, charging stations was a goal for us. I'm just thinking about how the raw materials for green energy come disproportionately from developing countries. So, how are we reconciling the need to clean up our energy sources with these human rights and environmental exploitations in the green energy supply chain? So yeah, that's like a really big question, but I think we need to think about solutions, both kind of on the sourcing end and on the waste end. So when we think about electric cars, electric batteries, things like that, how are they being disposed of and where are they going?
Yeah, I agree, and I I think you've done a good job of raising this issue. So thank you. We will give it some more thought.
Kevin and Amy, if I may, it's Kirsten. Amy, I just want to be straightforward to say that you're raising something that I think we can address at the enterprise level. So what employees call the state system, the state of Oregon system, or the enterprise. But that's large. That's going to be like, let's look into that with our partners at DEQ, Amy, on the sourcing and the disposal. That's not something that DLCD regulates or LCDC, but thank you for raising it. And you're right to be a contextual thinker like that, if that's okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right.
Thank
The
you.
last hand up I see is Bill.
I was wondering if I'm struggling to find it, but I was struggling if there was anywhere in these definitions what I would call a multimodal trip, such as pedestrian, bike. How far does that go until you can catch a feeder line, such as a bus service, which then would take me to like an arterial collector, such as Max, to get to where I want to go close enough, and then have a taxi service, and then get back home to get to my bike in the reverse. So what are the definitions of multimodal trip analysis? You know, how far is that versus me riding my bike from Gresham to downtown Portland? You know, I'd rather see the multimodal service, and I don't see that anywhere, but I might be missing it, and that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, Bill, no, you're right. It's not there. And I do think that's an important consideration, that, you know, people shift modes. And to the extent we can accommodate that, we're going to help the climate. I don't know if anybody else on the team wanted to comment on that concept. All right, seeing none, then I guess we're ready to move on in the agenda. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. I think we're now moving on to look at the equitable outcomes.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Yep.
So I think we'll go to Evan Manbell in just a second and kind of providing an overview of the equitable outcomes and where we are. And just as a reminder for this group, you know, we've talked about the equitable outcomes at the past 3 rulemaking advisory committee meetings, and a small group has also been discussing them outside of these large group meetings. So I think, Evan, over to you to describe where you are now and kind of any next steps on this.
Great, thanks, Sylvia. Evan Manvel, DLCD, he, him pronouns. We really have appreciated the last couple of months, all your guidance in crafting this document. We think it's improved significantly over those months. And just to remind you that the document is there to really guide our rulemaking and to screen us as we go forward in saying, hey, should we be drafting our rules? Let's look back at where we're trying to get. So it's really a core document for this rulemaking and related efforts, and we really appreciate where it's gotten. We're really hoping it's reflecting the outcomes the RAC members would like to see on the ground. We've added things in and recrafted them from your input, so thank you. It's also being shared with our external partners through the enterprise, through the state. So it's impacting other folks. Those who've been involved in the Every Mile Counts equity work can see some of it reflected, and some of that stuff from that reflected in this. So hopefully it's having a bigger impact than just this one or it is having a bigger impact than just this one document and rulemaking. I guess where we go now is really saying, hey, we've got to, I mean, there was a lot of rewriting, as you may have noticed, and restructured, so we didn't provide you a strike through. But we've really tried to structure it in a way that's intuitive to someone coming to the document for the first place. The things that we didn't integrate in there was kind of the people who were saying, hey, what does this actually mean in practice? And that's the hard work ahead. So that's kind of a lot what we're going to do in this meeting and in the meetings to come, is really saying, okay, what does it mean? What are those trade-offs? What are those balancing? How do we find something that gets to all our outcomes? So if you didn't see your comments integrated, some of that's hopefully integrated into other documents going forward. And lastly, I would say we're hoping to be relatively done with the language. There, I noticed one small punctuation typo, but it's also a living document. So if, as we learn things over the next few months and hear input, we need to revise the document, we are totally open to doing that. And if you have small comments or large comments, there is a place in the survey to provide those to us. So that's kind of where we're at with it. Thank you again for all your guidance, particularly to the subcommittee members who spent time with us, many hours. And I guess I would open it first to the members of the subcommittee who participated in that. If you have any additional comments or thoughts on how that process worked, or where we are with version 5 of this statement.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So anyone from that subgroup want to provide any reflections to kick us off here? Michael?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the document. And I agree, Evan, it does look a lot better now. I had two brief comments. One was regarding the section on action and accountability, which is, I think, the last page of the outcome statement. And I'm wondering whether or not this bullet point on information must be improved, whether or not that can be further elaborated in terms of what quantitative and qualitative information is needed at the state and local level, so that they can prioritize investments that will affect most positively the priority populations that you've identified. And the other comment was that I'm increasingly aware that the term accessibility may mean very different things to very different people. And so I'm wondering whether or not we may need to, I know it's in a footnote now, but I'm wondering whether or not we may need to bring that up a level into the text, just to make sure that there's less likelihood of confusion.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate those comments and your ongoing work on this document, greatly improving it. Certainly it can be something, the footnote versus main text thing is something we'll look at. And I think as far as the information being improved, your first comment, hopefully the discussion later today on performance measures and trying to say, okay, how are we actually measuring progress towards those outcomes will provide us the data wishes that we have. And then we can go back and map what data sets we have and what data sets we don't have, both qualitative and quantitative, against those how we're measuring our performance. But yeah, we certainly have a lot of conversations internally about mapping information and what information we need and don't have. So hopefully that for later discussion will inform that. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan.
Other comments? We have edited you into silence now. Sorry, yeah, 5 versions of a document is roughly enough for most folks. Yeah, I certainly will appreciate ongoing written comments, and we'll continue to craft it a little bit more. But
Evan, I guess I would just say, this is Kirsten, that, folks, if you have a hard time printing documents, please let Ingrid know, and I will go in the office and print and mail this to you. But I would encourage folks to keep these equitable outcomes at their right hand for the course of the rulemaking. This is our lens. This is really amazing, deep and broad work that this committee did. And remember, it was based on that first go around where you all said what was important to you. So it's invaluable to us, and we're going to be using it in that way as well. So if you want a hard copy of it, please let me know. I'm happy to go on. We're generally advised to stay out of the offices these days due to COVID, but I go on some late nights and weekends and do some select printing. So please do let me know if you'd like a hard copy. I'd be pleased to mail it to you. Thank you. Great work, you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirsten, Evan. And like Evan said, any other thoughts welcome via the survey, but hoping that this is the final version or near living document version of the equitable outcomes to move forward as a lens for this effort. So I think we can certainly be a little bit ahead of schedule and move into performance measures, measuring performance, because that's a really important topic for today. So let's go ahead and move into that. And in a second, I'll turn it over to Cody Meyer to give a bit of a presentation and framing on what is performance measures, how are they going to be used, et cetera. And then we're going to spend a bit of time in kind of a large group discussion just for clarifying questions, and then really focus on breakout room discussions where we're going to ask you about, thinking about yourself as a community member and a professional in your area of expertise. What's important to you? What outcomes are important to you so that the performance measures kind of match those outcomes. So kind of be thinking about that as Cody is framing this up for us this afternoon over the next 10 or so minutes. And then after our breakout rooms, we'll do a little bit of a report out. So Cody, over to you.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Cody Meyer with the department. And just kind of going in line with what Kevin was talking about. We just want to make sure that everyone is kind of understanding what we're talking about. And, apologies, we're trying our best to take these really complex kind of rules and topics and put them just, on paper is challenging enough. And then to, have 10 minutes to share this with you. So really appreciate all the comments and the survey responses. And if some of you might even notice some of your words in the staff report to you. So I really appreciate, new ideas and angles on this. So we're not really introducing anything new here. We're just kind of going back and making sure everyone's comfortable with what we're talking about because it is fairly complicated and, we're still trying to figure it out too. So next slide, please. What we have is a proposal on the table, and that proposal, you can go ahead and do that next bullet point or all of them if you want to. We want to track performance. You can't manage if you don't measure, right? And so what we're looking at measuring and managing is progress towards actions at the local level the cities and counties take on a daily business decision level. We also want to track progress towards meeting the goals. I think a good analogy might be that you want to buy a new house. You need a $50,000 down payment. That's your goal. You need that money to get a house. And so that's your overall goal. And there's two ways to do that. You can save money by spending less of your money on eating out and those kind of things, or you can make more money by having a garage sale or selling stuff on eBay in addition to your daily job. So as you go about trying to meet this goal, you measure how are you doing. So first you got to take inventory. How much money do I even make? What am I spending my money on? Where's that going? So that's kind of gathering the inventory data. What are we doing at a local city level? And then what effects might that have towards meeting our overall climate and equity goals? So that is something that we want to do and, gear up local governments to be able to measure any kind of performance measures that come down. And we want to be able to inventory that and report on it on an ongoing basis. We also want to set benchmarks like goals, mini goals or targets for meeting success for actions. And we also know that we have to be really careful. We want to do climate outcomes and we want to have equitable outcomes. And so supporting this work is going to have a demographic mapping tool. We've been working with some other state agencies to combine efforts. There's a lot of innovative stuff happening right now at the state level that it looks like we're going to be able to pull in a lot of great expertise to share all this great work with local governments. And so we'll be coming back and talking about that a little bit more in March. But the first two bullet points, we're talking about rule amendments. That's what we will be producing here. But as we've been saying, This is like kind of a program we're developing at the same time. So we want to make sure that we have technical assistance. That means that there's state staff or we hire consultants to go down and assist local governments in doing this work. The financial support, obviously, for those consultant support. And then we want to make sure that things that don't fit into the rule book, into an administrative rule, we have guidance. So we have documents that say, here's how you might do that. Here's some examples of how other people did that. Here's a data set that you could use to do that work. And so next slide, please. Going back to Division 44 and these regional goals, that's where, we kind of distilled down from this overall state goal. Then we have a transportation sector goal. Then we have these regional household light duty vehicle greenhouse gas reduction goals. Finding a goal for each region can happen in two ways. We say that Portland, Salem, Kaiser, Eugene, Springfield, they can develop a scenario plan and they could say, whatever mix of actions, lots of transit, a little bit of bike, some parking reform, we can get to our greenhouse gas reduction target. So that's a plan, a scenario plan to meet a goal. So basically, we're going to save $10 a month by not getting lattes out at Starbucks, and we're going to have a garage sale and we're going to meet our goal. So that's kind of a customized mix there. In the interim, for these other metropolitan areas, the statewide transportation strategy has identified areas where regions should be at to meet the overall reduction goal. And so we use these as guideposts in developing the targets, the greenhouse gas reduction targets. So we have those, and that's what we were talking earlier about, doing a gap analysis. So anything that you do in that blue box is fundamental to getting to an orange box. So you have to know how much you're spending every month and what the gap is between your spending habits and you saving $200 a month. So that is just saying, where are we at? Where does the STS say we should be at over the planning horizon for the future? And so are our plans going in the right direction? Are they going in the right direction? And we just need to do a lot more work in different areas. And that kind of sets the stage for where do you need to work harder in your local city plans? So next slide or animation. So these could be some examples of some regional goals. And Mary Kyle, hear you. We can put up a chart and kind of give some basics of like how high aspirationally have we found these to be. But just to say, conceptually, increasing the share of people taking a bike on a short trip rather than driving, a regional goal for increasing the amount of households living in a compact mixed use area, or increased transit ridership. So those are good goals for a region to have, which are a bunch of cities, in a region. Next slide. On the secondary level, we have the actions, the downstream actions that cities and counties take. So these are zoning code, these are parking mandates, these are where are we spending our money on sidewalks or bike lanes or bike paths. And those are very action-based things. So next box, please. So kind of looking between the local actions and a performance measure locally and how that would relate to a local goal or a regional goal rather, is it's a 1-to-1, 2-to-2 crosswalk here. So if your regional goal is increasing the share of people taking bike trips, then locally you might put more money and work into building out an active transportation network and increasing connectivity and making that more convenient for folks to get around and making, it go places where people want to go. If you wanted to get more people into compact mixed use neighborhoods, then locally you can amend your zoning code to have supportive mixed use zoning in key areas where there's already density or there's already commercial activity, or you are building out a new green field out on the edge and you want to make sure that it has a mix of uses so people can walk and bike to get around. And similar for increased transit ridership is that now you want to build the land uses that really can support the transit rather than expecting the transit to serve any old land use pattern that you throw out. So the next slide, and I think that might be it for me. Yeah, so next steps, we heard you loud and clear. The 2018 performance measures need some work. We threw that out there just to, see what people felt, and we heard you. We're not going to go any farther with those. it's going to be a lot of work to kind of go through this stuff. So we do need to take that off of, the RAC's plate and have a side group that's working on this stuff specifically. And so I would expect over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll have several meetings. Today, we want to talk about kind of where are the priority outcome areas that we want to talk about. We know basically what actions and what levels of those actions we need to do to reduce climate pollution. But we wanted to know really specifically, like within those action areas, like what do people really care about? What really affects them on a daily level? We want to bring back those as kind of a refined list of what we've heard today. Talk a little bit more about equity mapping and priority population areas. Make sure that we are able to steer the benefits to spread equally or to, restore some past harms. And then we'll have a series of working groups over the next 2 or 3 months, as I said. We'll also have some community conversations in the metropolitan areas where we're going to also ask, where do people really care? What do we need to look for? What do we need to think about? So hopefully the plan would be to come back in June to the RAC with a draft performance measures for discussion at that point. And we really, a couple of people have already sent me an email and said they want to, sit on this group, and we really appreciate getting a good mix of folks to be there. And so please do send in an email if you think you could spare a couple more hours of your day talking about performance measures. And I am happy to take any kind of questions or discussion now.
Yeah, thank you, Cody. So any clarifying questions on anything you just heard here, or any initial reflections? We are going to get into breakout rooms shortly and we'll pose the questions for those breakout rooms before we go in there. But yeah, any questions, thoughts? Let's see, Leanne, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering if they could put through the email into the chat for folks who are interested in the performance measures work group. Thank you.
Yeah, I think easy breezy would be to Ingrid, who you get all your notices from, but we could also put that in the chat. Thank you, Leanne. Or Bill says just the basic rulemaking website. And just so folks know, so it's not so mysterious, that anything you send to that is read by about 5 people. Ingrid, the co-project managers, Bill and Kevin, probably Cody and maybe Matt. But if you want to associate with a human being, you could just email Ingrid.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thank you. And Emma.
Thank you. Emma Newman, City of Springfield, she, her pronouns. I brought this up, I think, at the previous meeting. I'm still a little bit unclear as to whether the performance measures are intended to be like kind of blanket performance measures that would be the same applied everywhere in the state, or if there's actually a connection between the regional scenario planning work and the outcomes of that work that would be done in each metropolitan area that would then inform performance measures.
Thanks, Emma.
That might be more specific.
Yeah, I think the answer would be that on the regional scale performance measures, they're going to be the same things that you need to measure roughly. You could add more, but I think we'll have a base set of like, you got to get these ones in there. But the levels of ambition, if you do a scenario plan, would be a customized mix of what is regionally preferred. And of course, we're always open to having new ideas and things that we never thought about. So that's good. I'm not sure about the local ones. I think we're still sorting that out of how that actually fits into a rulemaking language format. And honestly, we'll probably be part of the subgroup work to figure that out. But great question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Amy?
Hi, thank you. So looking through the packet, it seems like this process was attempted earlier in 2018 like finding, setting out performance measures. And then I read that those proposed rules were not adopted. I apologize, I'm outdoors if you hear cars and stuff. So were those not adopted because the LCD had to pause the rulemaking, or was there another reason why those weren't adopted?
So those were not adopted because the overall rulemaking was paused, is put on hold. And so it wasn't anything to do specifically with those performance measures. It was just an overall decision that was made. And that was a lot of it was in response to the cap and invest legislation that was happening kind of right in the middle, or soon to be at the rule. I can't remember. But anyway, there's some stuff that's above my pay grade.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah. No, Cody's right, Amy. It was the cap and invest, and also just the notion that we aren't meeting our targets, and would those, would all that program still being voluntary get us to our target? So it is certainly a different day now with the metropolitan areas. It's no longer voluntary. It's required to do this planning. So like Cody said, there's nothing wrong with the performance measure per se. They just kind of got put on hold, and then they're about to be picked up here in our small groups. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And Alex, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, this is Alex Fan. I'm with Oregon Realtors and I'm an alternate. I had a question about in the equitable outcomes, it talks about including maps of race, ethnicity, disability, and other key demographic factors. I know how important that is, but should there be any consideration how that information could also be negatively used? And curious on who would have access to that information, kind of those thoughts.
Yeah, it's a good point. I would just point out that the information that we would use is all publicly available anyway. So that information's already out there for anyone who wanted to do evil with it. We can't control that. The best I think we could say is like we want to do good with it. But yeah, it's a good point, and we do want to be sensitive and make sure that we're not having unintended consequences of our rules or our tools that we put out there.
I think Alex raises a really good point, and I think we should sit with that too for a while, because this rulemaking is positing also investment in areas that have received historic underinvestment. So just, I think it's a really good sensitivity to continue to hold and be thinking about the maps. Cody's right, EJ screen, the information is publicly available now of where folks live generally, and census block groups, it's not down to the household level. So wouldn't be revealing household level data, but it's a really, really important point, I think, for us to remember and to think about going through, and also to even be always describing why we're not pointing out race, because race, anything we're pointing out, we're trying to get at areas that are historically underinvested in. So maybe that's a better way we shift our language to talking about it, Alex. So thanks for raising that, because there's been a lot in increase in hate crimes lately, and we just certainly don't want to have any of our maps being used for any reason like that. So thanks for raising that.
I would just add to that, as I was thinking, is that an idea that we've been discussing with some other agencies is kind of rolling up the priority population. So you're not specifically saying this is where one race or another lives. You're saying that given all these factors that define all these demographics that define a priority population area, here is an area where we should invest in. And that way you're kind of masking the kind of individuality of some of that stuff.
All right, thanks, Alex, Cody, and Kirsten. So I think in a moment we can get into our breakout rooms, but just want to give a little bit of framing before we do that and some instruction. So when we get into breakout rooms, we're going to be asking you all to kind of think about the 5 policy areas, and Cody's going to describe those in just a second in a little bit more detail. But I think you saw these before, but it's kind of the policy areas that are intended to reduce climate pollution that include walkable mixed-use neighborhoods, increased walking and biking, more transit service, managing parking, and supporting transportation options. And so we're going to be asking you, when you think about those areas, what outcomes are important to you, kind of from your community lived experience perspective, and also as a professional in your area of expertise. The idea being that, hearing what's important to you, what outcomes are important to you, can help make sure those performance measures are headed on the right track. And so, Cody, do you want to can you describe a little bit more of those policy areas before we get in?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think I could say any better than you did. You're getting your honorary planning degree. I think I'll just repeat what you said. Kevin mentioned what a walkable mixed-use neighborhood might be, where you have a mix of housing types, single family, fourplex, apartment. You have goods and services nearby. You can walk to the store. You can go get your dry cleaning without hopping in the car. So it's shorter trips. So not to say that you can't drive, it's just that you don't have to drive all the way across town to go to the bank. But you can also, it's really an enabling strategy for all these other transportation things that cities do. So obviously that would highly influence walking and biking, but there's also infrastructure and programs that cities and counties can work on to get people out walking and biking a little bit more. Some of those things might be wider sidewalks, a protected bike lane where you're not, on this little narrow bike lane on a really fast street. You have increased transit service and availability. So if the bus comes once a day, maybe you'll take it. If the bus came every 10 minutes, that's pretty convenient. You could just go grab it anytime you want. And is that near your house? So you're not going to go walk across town to go take the 10-minute headway bus. Managing parking might be that there is not just huge seas of parking lots everywhere, that there is actually right-sized parking to the neighborhood. And it might be something where they're charging for parking pricing in a downtown where there's a lot of people who want to go down there in their car. And so you manage that by paying some fees or different times of day, having different fee structures. And then the last one is supporting transportation options. And that one, there's some pretty jargony terms. The original one was TDM, transportation demand management. More frequently, it's called transportation options, which it is what it says. It's providing people with information, with subsidies to have an abundance of transportation options. So you might get a free transit pass at your work. Or you might get, your work might say, hey, if we don't really want to have this parking lot anymore, we could make a lot of money renting it out to build a building. So can we pay you $10 a month, everybody, if you don't drive your car down here and park in our parking lot? There's just a variety of kind of programmatic stuff that cities and counties can influence or do, or also the private sector can also do that. Obviously, employers have a large influence there too. I hope I explained that well. If anyone has any questions before any breakout, we have a huge team of experts here that can answer these questions probably better than I can.
Yeah, and I think we can also answer some of those in the breakouts themselves if needed. All right, well, thank you, Cody. So in a minute, we'll get in breakout rooms. Ingrid has been magically putting you all into groups and we'll be magically transporting you in just a moment. But before we get into our groups, we'll have our conversation and then we'll also be doing a report out. And some of you have already kindly volunteered to report out prior to today's meeting and you know who you are. And in other groups, you'll be assigned if you don't already have a reporter. And as we do breakout rooms and future RAC meetings, we'll try to rotate out who's reporting out. So we're kind of hearing from more of you. And if you are an alternate for a primary member and you're both here, your primary and alternate are here, Ingrid should be putting you in the same groups, but if not, you'll just kind of be following go to the same group as your primary. And we ask that, the primary, to speak in the discussion group so that we're hearing from that person primarily. I think before we go, Kirsten, did you have something to add? I saw you go off mute. Okay. All right. Let's come back at maybe 2:40 if that's okay, Ingrid. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which I think is great, but that'll give us a little bit of extra time in the breakout rooms. So with that, let's all get into our breakout rooms and we'll come back at 2:40 for kind of 2-minute report outs from each group.
Sylvia, the only thing I think I was going to add is that we won't be assigning reporters. We're going to be asking folks
Thank you.
to
Okay.
volunteer for that. And so if you have done it, please kind of pass the baton or pass the mic to someone else who hasn't done a report out. It's like Sylvia said, we're going to try and hear, by the time December rolls around, we're going to try and hear from everybody. So thank you for those that have volunteered today. Thanks, Sylvia.
Thank you. See you all soon. So just click the blue button that pops up on your screen.
So I don't see a blue button.
Is that Ellen?
This is Ariel.
Sorry, Ariel. Oh, okay, Ariel.
I got kicked off of the Zoom a little bit ago. I don't know if maybe that's when you were looking at people's names, but.
Okay. John, if you could help me out, I'm not seeing an option to allow to assign people who are left here to get into a room.
Do you know what room she's supposed to be in?
Yes, Ariel should be in room 4.
All right, I'll move her and then I'll put something together so that you know how to do it in the future.
Okay, and I see Ron is here in the main room still. Ron should be in room 6.
It looks like Ron and Ellen haven't moved themselves.
Yeah, they're assigned.
assigned.
They just haven't moved.
And Evan's asking me for help.
I'm not sure you can help him. I don't think you can leave.
Well, a window's come up which says, oh, does this mean that he wants me to join the breakout room? I'm not sure. I think it does, and I don't really want to do that. And I see Ellen is still here.
Yeah, just let Evan know that you, as the host, you can't leave the main room.
Okay.
Do we have a slide to post for the breakout sessions?
Yeah, I do. Any luck with moving Ellen, John?
So you already assigned her. We can't forcibly make them go into the breakout room. So she hasn't moved herself.
Oh, she hasn't joined. Okay.
Yeah, she hasn't joined us all.
Okay, thank you.
how long that will take. Oops. And then measuring if that's not enough, what else can we do?
Thanks.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we were the first ones kicked out?
No, I think we're all back in the large.
Okay.
Here.
Our small group discussion was somehow still continuing despite.
Right. Yeah.
Steve Lee, thank you for joining us. Hopefully that was interesting. I know he's been through so much of that in other communities.
Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had fruitful discussions in your small groups there. I think it's always helpful to kind of break up and get a little bit more in depth and to hear from more of you. So appreciate you participating in those. So next we're going to get into our report outs before we get into a break. And again, I think your discussion leaders probably said this, but we're really just looking for 2 or 3 key highlights from what was said, not a recap of the whole discussion, because that would be too long of a report out. And of course, we're curious to hear what was said, but we do have the recordings to do that. And we also have the written notes. So I think I'll go first to the reporter for Bill's group, which I believe is Simeon Jacob, and just try to keep it to about 2 minutes. And then, so we'll go to Simeon, and then we'll go to Mary Kyle McCurdy, who is the reporter for my group. And then we will go to Mari Valencia from Cody's group, and then I'll call the next ones as well. So Simeon, take it away.
Sure thing. Thank you, everyone. Simeon Jacob, he, they, with Apano. In our group, some of the first things that came up for us was talking about safety, whether that was around sidewalks, feeling safe in the environment, along with lighting, then with talking through building out complete neighborhoods and complete communities. This idea that if we are building sidewalks and these bike paths, they have to lead to somewhere, and that that they are connecting to our grocery stores, our schools, and so on. I think another thing that was asked to be highlighted from our group was also just recognizing that we measure out and identify the ratio of green spaces compared to concrete, especially thinking about these large parking spaces and as long as the mini roads. And then what really completes it all is the industry and really balancing different industry that supports our different cities and towns. So that in particular is with like freight routes and recognizing that we're able to get the things that we need in and out of our city. So I'll just pause there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Simeon. Sorry for that buzzing there.
Sure, it felt like a cue.
I don't think it was you. Great. Okay, so we'll go to the next group. And just a reminder to the staff that's sharing your screens, if you can just zoom in as much as you can. That last one was a little bit hard to see. So going forward, let's try to zoom in. And I'm the next one, so I'll be sure to take that cue for myself. So now we'll go to the next group, which was my group, and our reporter is Mary Kyle McCurdy. So let me just share this. And go ahead, Mary Kyle.
Thanks, Sylvia. So our group mentioned most often as their personal aspect or personal choice was improving walking infrastructure and being able to walk safely in all respects, meaning protected, accessible, and walking infrastructure that takes you where you need to go in a relatively connected and short distance, and that also it's safe to be walking, not just physically safe in terms of being separated from cars and safe sidewalk infrastructure, but also a feeling of safety, feeling free from discriminatory enforcement and harassment in particular. But the overall, both kind of professional and overall, looking at our communities, I think the thing that came up most was the mixed use compact walkable communities and how that emphasizes that these are all really interconnected, that to have safe sidewalks and bicycling facilities that people use requires that they take you where you need to go relatively quickly or close by. And that to achieve that, we need more housing in mixed use compact areas. And then that really needs to happen before, to enable higher levels of transit to take place. And that those are really the land use things that local governments can provide, and really often that providing it means removing barriers to these things happening now, removing barriers to the mixed use compact communities, as well as investing in safe bicycling and walking infrastructure. I think that was basically it.
Thank you, Mary Kyle. Appreciate that. And next, let's go to Cody's group. And I believe the reporter there is Mari Valencia. I'll stop.
Sorry, Mari had to bow out today. She had something come up. Sorry.
It's okay. Rob Interfeld has agreed to be our reporter. So I'll put up that's Rob.
Yes, thanks, Cody. Okay, I'll do my best to sum up what we said. So part of the theme was having a safe network for walking, biking, taking transit, especially for crossing busy streets, having connected infrastructure for active transportation and a bus system that gets people to where they need to go. Also, for people that don't own a car, access to a car for when they need it, so that can support a lifestyle of not having a car most of the time, and having affordable. So that was sort of like the transportation network side. Then also in terms of more on the housing side is having affordable housing options and also daycare within walking distance to key services and frequent transit. And making sure that as the infrastructure improves for active transportation, that people don't get displaced, and also that BIPOC communities have access to green jobs that are created. And then lastly, something we talked about was just the importance of also having disincentives to driving. So making driving more difficult, more expensive, to sort of, on the one hand, we're talking about how to make it easier to walk and bike and take the bus, but that also needs to be balanced out with making it harder to drive. That's it.
Great, thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. And next we'll go to Matt's group, Matt and Samuel's group, and then to Evan's group. And I believe the reporter there is Francisco Ibarra. But Matt, to you first.
Go ahead.
That's me reporting out a lot of things that have been said previously, but our group did, really indicate that all of those things on that list were important. We talked a lot about the need for improved transit service as well as amenities such as shelters to help support the transit system. We had a fair amount of discussion also around walking and the need for safe walking, both to access transit, but just in the community in general. We discussed the importance of affordable housing and especially ensuring those that have been most harmed or excluded will be reaping the benefits of that affordable housing, especially when it's looking at communities that were destroyed or displaced, people that were displaced. And we had a lot of conversation around the need for funding, the need for more of it, the need to make sure it's prioritized onto the things that will have the greatest climate benefit. And we got a pretty big plug and applaud at the end there in support of spending it all on making transit 100% free for everyone. That's it.
Thank you so much, Kari. Let's go to Francisco, and then lastly, we'll end with Kevin's group, and the reporter there, I believe, is Laquita.
Hi there.
So in our group, we talked about kind of diversity. We talked about the varying incomes. You know, if transit serves a multitude of people, then there's a higher chance of security. You know, we talked about being safe and having secure transit. Um, you know, and then talking about like, you know, if transit serves the middle class, and there's a bigger chance that it'll serve um, the priority groups that we've been talking about. And then also in terms of needs, you know, there's a diversity of needs amongst people, amongst families on a daily basis. You know, some days you might take your kid to school or doctor appointments or even just grocery shopping. So take into account that not every single day will be the same. And then thinking about the rural perspective, I think most of us were speaking more in terms of like, you know, metro regions that are more urban, but also keeping that in mind that rural, less urban areas are also dealing with some of these issues at a greater scale also, since, you know, some of them could be naturally in a food desert area where they have to drive across valleys just to access foods, healthy foods. And then, you know, in talking about access and mobility, not focusing too much on mobility, but also more on access. And for example, like being able to walk to a store within 20 minutes, or walking to a store in 20 minutes does not look the same as, you know, riding the bus for 20 minutes. You know, riding the bus for 20 minutes can take you, you know, from like Gresham all the way to, you know, Gateway, you know, so considering having, you know, grocery stores, medical offices within like 20 minutes, you know, thinking about the 20-minute neighborhood. So just having that within closer distances where it is more accessible to people walking, not necessarily just taking transit. And then just reiterating the last point about funding. So it's not just about rules, but also about, you know, where can we get money to implement some of these projects that we've been talking about. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then we'll go to Laquita reporting from Evans Group.
So can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So what I have, it echoes, and we're, you know, the last but not least group to be heard from, is that recognizing that the, you know, the theme of mixed use may not work for all parts of the regions, as someone had mentioned, but we tapped in on mixed use not being affordable or not being built in all communities. To make transit more accessible needs to be affordable, convenient, and safe. And safety was like a huge start to our conversation, and the need to speak to and engage our youth and our elders as our young people are entering, you know, their adulthood, and as our elders are aging out. And I also have a quick note here from another great person that was part of it. We said it about, you know, safety on our sidewalks and our biking lanes. Also making sure that the communities that have been disproportionately underserved are a part of these conversations. And with our, something that I mentioned that means a lot to me is like our unhoused communities being, you know, the safety on public transportation as well in the now, and the reality of like when people re-enter back into housing, they're not going to have, you know, the job or, you know, be able to make their appointments. So touching on incentive and rewards for those communities, and like just basically having options. I hope that I was able to deliver for my group. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Laquita. I really appreciate that. And thank you to everyone. Those sounded like really rich conversations, and appreciate you, being brave to speak on behalf of your group to the whole group here. I just want to make a few observations on some of the key themes that I heard, because there were some words that just came up over and over again. And I think primarily it was safety and connectivity. A lot of you talked about the need for safety, especially for sidewalks, transit, really across all the different areas, and especially for underserved areas that have been underinvested in, as well as connectivity for your communities. So if you're going to put in those bike paths and sidewalks and transit, make sure they're connecting you to where you need to go. And really walking was really critical, both that it be safe, and a lot of you also brought up the need for affordable housing that's well connected to services that people need, and especially for displaced communities. And I also heard the need for better transit, more safe transit, and that's free from discrimination, especially for BIPOC marginalized communities. And also a need for just more funding, right, to be able to pay for these prioritized actions that have the most climate benefit. So certainly a lot more comments than that, but I think those were some of the key themes that at least I heard that stood out. And, we are surprisingly a little bit ahead of schedule, and I think we can open it up to a little bit of discussion before we get into a break. If people had other reflections, or if anything else stood out to you as either common themes or, interesting other distinctions, interesting ideas that might not have been reflected in the report outs. So if anything comes to mind, feel free to raise your hand and we can have a little bit of discussion here. Paige West, go ahead.
Yeah, just realizing as we're talking about options that car sharing and transit network companies or Uber, Lyft, bike share, scooters, where are we placing those? I mean, are we going to, it absolutely has to be part of whatever it is that we're trying to build out here, but it's kind of not identified in a specific location. So I'm just curious if the staff have thought about where that sits.
Anyone from DLCD want to focus on that or have any thoughts?
Yeah, hi, this is Bill Holmstrom. So are you talking about, Paige, in terms of how we're going to handle those type of services within our transportation planning processes? Is that what you're asking? Or?
So, I mean, we're calling out bike ped transit very specifically in all of our conversations, but just in particular, when we were talking about parking restraints in our prior conversation and how difficult it is if you are in a neighborhood where you are only given one parking space and you can't have visitors. And then, another group talked about shopping and other trips that are just not realistic, honestly, without a car. And getting a ride with somebody or getting a ride on car share. And so it seems like that needs to be more like, I'm thinking of it more as the public transportation. I mean, we call it public transportation and we immediately think of a bus.
Yeah.
But I also think that there are other strategies under public transportation like car sharing and TNCs and ways that we can help to, improve people's access and mobility. I guess I'm just making an observation that it's not really apparent how we're categorizing that.
Yeah, and I mean, when we talk about bicycles, there's also scooters and mopeds and the whole spectrum of devices in between motorcycles and roller skates, I guess. I don't know. There's all sorts of things. So, yeah, that's, I don't know how much we'll get into that, but I think maybe curb space management is maybe what we'll be talking about a little bit, or at least require local jurisdictions to think about that. One thing that came up in our group was freight and freight access and loading, and that's kind of connected to curb management as well. So I think that's something we'll be paying attention to, even if it's not one of the headline items.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's go to Ken and then Julie. So go ahead, Ken.
All right. Sorry, I kept coming in and out of meeting because of internet connectivity here in Clackamas County hasn't been the best, given our trees down and everything. But I just wanted to echo what the other group said about single parents. You know, it is a challenge, and their challenges are a little different based on where they're located. You know, if in a more urban setting, there's more transportation options, but also, you know, you have concerns about getting groceries close in. Often where they live, there is not a grocery store. It's a food desert somewhat. And then trying to get kids from different activities or schools and trying to do it almost simultaneously is really rough in terms of, you know, you may have two kids at two different schools and then have groceries to pick up. So it's hard to do it on a bike at times, and especially if you got multiple kids. And and then on rural areas, again, you may be further distance from services. So for example, and you may be more impacted by, say, weather or other events, as we've showcased in, I know some of my single parent colleagues have been really impacted because of the ice storms and had to have people bring them groceries because they couldn't get out. And so I just think keeping that in mind, that if you think about the everyday, you know, struggles of a single parent trying to find childcare, trying to get groceries, trying to work a full-time job, having a multitude of transportation options is helpful in helping, whether that's getting kids to school, getting you know, around to different destinations. And so as we start to think about that, I really think we need to keep those scenarios in mind. Also for electric vehicles, it's often that single parents are kind of cut out of that because there's not a great charging network in like apartments complexes or other multi-unit properties. So it's hard to even own, say, what could be a very affordable option, say a used Nissan Leaf. You know, some of those you can pick up for $6,000-$7,000 and it could reduce your operating costs, but you can't charge it. So, or you have a hard time charging it. That's it.
Thanks, Ken. And Julie.
Hi, I just wanted to add on to what Paige was saying about, you know, the other mobility options, you know, the whole last mile stuff. I know that, you know, I think it was probably 10 years ago almost, the city of Salem adopted some regulations about, you know, use of skateboards. And I know there seems to be sort of like this vacuum at the state level on, you know, where should skateboards be used? And now you add on to that scooters and, you know, all these other different mobility options that I think, you know, there's a couple of issues. One, where can they be used legally and safely? And then the second issue is, how are they managed and operated? You know, who does that? Anyway, they're just open questions. And I know that our transit district in the Salem-Keizer area is going to be doing, doing a new update to the long-range transit plan. And I believe that they're going to be trying to tackle some of those issues in terms of connections to transit. But there's a lot of questions that are probably going to fall on the local jurisdictions in terms of what we allowed and what can be provided. So it's not just curb zone, I guess. That's it.
Thank you, Julie. And Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. As I trying to think about like transit upgrades and accessibility, I live next to Hillsborough High School, and the nearest bus stop is a 26 to 30 minute walk for anybody. So there's I mean, even when I didn't have a car, when I had to take public transportation to go across town to get services, that is a very long day. especially when you're walking 30 minutes without any sidewalks. I can't even express like how dangerous it is to walk on Witch Hazel Road going towards Hillsborough High School. There's no sidewalks for people to walk. This is also where there's a couple, I think the school district's construction building is, so they've got trucks going in and out of there. There's also some storage places where big trucks go in and out of. So I'm kind of hoping to put this on somebody's radar or on someone's list, that when you get, when you're thinking about making transit or transportation or public transportation equitable and accessible to families, to kind of look in the area that where all these students are.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate that. Right.
Hey, Sylvia, if we have time, Mr. Steve Lee has a comment to contribute.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Steve.
Sure. A lot doesn't get said in the mixed use part of it about the small business and the health of small businesses. And I think that, the best way to reduce trips is to get people to go to places other than work within their neighborhood. So that's one thing, is kind of a small business strategy to kind of think about. The other part is this area. I live on the east edge of the downtown core, and in this neighborhood, the vibrancy is gone. And so the extent that we can kind of reinvent our cores with more 24-hour sidewalks. So some of the cultural business, legacy businesses are gone. So bringing those back, and how can you really start to measure the vibrancy of a community by how many people on the sidewalk for how long? And the final piece is in construction. I've seen a lot of businesses kind of fail by disruptions in construction of both housing and transportation. So trying to kind of keep track of how do you keep small businesses from having their kind of disruptions occur when you put in new infrastructure. Just a couple of things to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. And Sushmita, do you have a quick comment? And then I think we'll probably maybe head back to DLCD with any next steps on the performance measures, and then head into a break.
Thank you. I want to second everything that Rebecca and Steve have said. I live in Washington County. We do not have bus shelters for people to actually even use transit or feel safe while walking. And there are no sidewalks in places where we need sidewalks. So we talk about climate justice, but we don't have the infrastructure or the connectivity between governments to actually implement any programs that will support that. And as a small business owner, we know that micro businesses and small businesses cannot be in highly accessible regions because those places are very expensive. So they are out there in neighborhoods and business parks. And I have a business for the last 14 years on Cornelius Pass, which is such a huge road, so well connected by car, not by transit. So how are our businesses? There are 300 businesses in my business park with Kohl's and Winco all across from us, but there is no public transit. So how are we are removing the possibility of economic prosperity for micro businesses, small businesses, BIPOC communities. We are removing the possibility of children, youth, adults using public transit just by not having the right infrastructure. And so, of course, if I do not have the money or the economic prosperity, how am I as a small business owner supposed to listen to people tell me about climate justice and take and do things to support? I do, but not everybody can. So that's all.
Thank you for that. And maybe Cody, anything you want to say about next steps on this before we head into a break, or closing thoughts?
This is a great conversation. I'm super happy. This meeting is really great feedback for us, so thank you. I've got a number of folks want to sign up for the performance measures work group. I know it's pretty wonky topic, but most of them are city staff. And so if I can maybe just prod, I'd like to get a broad range of perspectives here so we can have a balanced point of view. So if I just encourage some other folks, and I am more than willing to making it easier on you if you want to go to less meetings and you just want to pop in a couple times. A low commitment effort here, so. And feel free to email me directly or that DLCD CFAC web email address. And thank you to the city folks that want to sign up too. I don't want to disparage your volunteerism there. I'm really happy to have you as well.
We need you. We need both and all.
That's right.
All right, thank you, Cody. Well, with that, let's head into a well-deserved break and get back together at 3:20. So feel free to go on mute, turn off your video, but stay in the platform, and we'll see you at 3:20 for the next topic. All right, welcome back, folks. I hope most of you are back on the line. We're going to get into our next big topic of the day, which is monitoring and reporting. And here I'll hand it over to Bill to give us some framing and context, and then we'll get into our discussion. And so today we'll have, we'll start with a poll for our discussion and then get into a sticky wall type exercise that we're going to introduce today, and then have some large group discussion as well. So Bill, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Again, Bill Holmstrom, DLCD staff. Happy to have you all here today. We're going to be talking a little bit today about monitoring and reporting. Let me get into it. There was a short memo in your packet that talked a little bit about this. This is really the introduction of this for the advisory committee. We have some proposals for what we're interested in doing with monitoring and reporting. But first of all, I want to go a little bit about why we want to do it, what the existing requirements, and then we'll talk a little bit what we're proposing. And then, yeah, like Sylvia mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about getting some feedback so that when we put together a full proposal, that will reflect some of the feedback that came from the advisory committee. So why should we do monitoring and reporting? Well, it's important to know that we want to know they're moving in the right direction. If local jurisdictions aren't keeping track of where we are and reporting that clearly and publicly on a regular basis, we don't know that we're doing the right thing. We might be able to, stick our thumb in the air and maybe guess which way the wind is blowing, but we want to make sure that we know that we're moving in the right direction. So continually having public reporting is good to make sure that we're moving in the right direction, and that goes for the state as well. Just to know that the state as a whole is moving in the right direction as well, and that's something the state agencies are working on as well at the state level, is how we're going to be doing monitoring and reporting at the state level. Accountability, just to make sure that people who are responsible, or the jurisdictions or the entities that are responsible for making progress are doing so, and that we're continuing to hold people accountable for those actions. Identifying if we need to make changes, if we see that there's something that's going in the wrong direction or not moving in the right direction far enough, that we are able to take action and make changes so that we're able to move in that direction. And the final one is to learn what works. We know, you have reports from many jurisdictions across the state, and some are doing good in one area and some are doing good in another area. You may be able to look and see, gosh, what is that other city doing? How are they getting those results? And maybe doing some things that there may be something that you can learn from those, what they're doing right, and learn what works and be able to learn from their experience. So that's why we're interested in moving forward with enhancing our monitoring and reporting. So we do have existing requirements in the transportation planning rules. That's Division 12 of our rules, about how local jurisdictions should be reporting on their progress around some aspects of their transportation planning, around transportation and land use planning. The requirements are pretty unclear. In the memo, it does talk a little bit, just a little excerpt in there about what needs to be reported. It doesn't really get into very much detail about how that works. And I think the results of what we've seen over the last 20 years or so is that we haven't seen reports very often. It doesn't happen that often. And when it does, it just kind of drips and drabs, and the reports don't always include everything that we'd be interested in seeing. So we're interested in implementing very clear requirements for who needs to do the things, what needs to be in those reports, how often those reports are expected, and what to do when those reports show that things aren't going in the direction that we want to see. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit right now, is the post framework we're going to talk about. And I think the overlying thing for this whole part of the process is that we're interested in making it very clear for jurisdictions what the requirements are. We want to make them, so it's very clear for one thing, but also we want to make sure that, there's a level of burden that goes with doing this work, and we understand that, and we want to make sure that to the extent that there is a burden, that we're making it as minimal as possible, as making it as easy for jurisdictions as possible. One thing, just as an aside, recently our commission passed some rules having to do with housing, and as part of that, and it was part of legislation as well, is there's some reporting that was required on an annual basis, and the department has moved forward with an electronic reporting system, so it hopefully makes it a lot easier for jurisdictions just to kind of plug in some of their numbers and be able to meet those reporting requirements on an ongoing basis. So to the extent that we can make this easier for jurisdictions, we want to be able to do that. So we're interested in hearing from jurisdictions. We're going to be requiring monitoring reporting. What's the best way to do that so that it actually happens and so that it's easy for you to do this? So and it goes to who's responsible. It's going to be cities and counties in metropolitan areas. That's who we're talking about. The things that we expect to be in a report, and this is something we'll be talking about in our session after my presentation here, or in our poll and in our we're going to have a little interactive thing here. Is what goes in those reports, what's important to hear from local jurisdictions. The things that we know are going to be in those reports are the progress towards meeting targets against a set of performance measures, and what those performance measures look like. That's what we just talked about. Is we're going to have this work group that's going to look at a whole range of different things. We're going to have a range of performance measures that local jurisdictions are going to look at. Different places are going to be, different cities and counties are going to be at different places right now, and they're going to have different places they're going to need to be in a few years, just by nature of like who they are and what the situation looks like in their local jurisdiction. So we're going to have to sit down with all the jurisdictions where this applies and say, okay, in 2030, where do you need to be? In 2035, where do you need to be? All along the way, have those little targets. And so when they make those reports, you're going to have to say, well, this is, in 2025, this is where we needed to be, and this is where we are. And so is there a gap between those? Are you meeting your target? Are you a little bit behind? Are you ahead of it? So we know we're going to be reporting that. That's going to be part of these reports. And then the other piece of this is going to be progress towards implementing scenario planning. Like Cody and Kevin talked a little bit about how the scenario planning is going to be rolling out. In those places that have scenario planning requirements or that have implemented a scenario plan, these reports are going to talk about how they're doing towards implementing those plans. So this isn't going to be necessarily applicable everywhere right away. And then the other thing is other information. So I think, we're interested in hearing from folks. Is there other things that you think these reports should include? Maybe aren't just a number. Maybe just have some, some information. Again, we want to balance the ease of reporting and the administrative burden on our local jurisdictions, which we know are already under-resourced, with the need to have this information publicly available so that we can have, for all the reasons that we talked about earlier. How often are we going to require these reports? So I think, we've been moving forward with the assumption that these reports would generally be about every 4 to 5 years, that lining up with federal transportation planning requirements in each of those metropolitan areas. And the reason it says 4 or 5 is because some metropolitan areas it's 4, some metropolitan areas it's 5. My understanding, it has to do with air quality, conformity in each of those areas. I don't really get all the ins and outs of that, but in some places that are doing good with their air quality, they can do a plan every 5 years. In some places that need a little help, they have to do a little bit shorter term, turn around a little bit more often. It's every 4 years. So in the past, that's where our cycle has been. But recently we've looked and seen, for our housing rules, that's an annual cycle. So as often as annually, is that the right place to have these reports? Don't know. I think that's something we'll be talking about a little bit here in a second. And then, I think, what do we do if the report says, we've got these targets for the future years, and we know when we get those years and they do those reports and they say this is where we are, what happens if they haven't quite met those targets? I think, the report's going to say, hey, we know we didn't meet this target. This is what we're going to do to get there. And so that's going to be part of the report as well. And that'll be something that our commission will be able to hold local jurisdictions to say, hey, your report that you submitted to us says you're going to do this. You want to make sure you do that so that you get to where you're going. So that's what we're talking about with monitoring and reporting. Yeah, and I think we're ready to move on into the poll and the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Appreciate it.
Bill. Appreciate that. So next we want to do, well, first, maybe just any clarifying questions, if anything just really doesn't make sense to you before we get into the next kind of discussion and polling here. Okay, and always welcome to ask questions later. Oh, let's see, Emma, go ahead.
I just have one clarifying question. With regards to housing, I'd like to better understand what that reporting consists of. Based on talking to a coworker, it sounds like maybe there's annual reporting for kind of simple numbers like permits, housing types, qualified income units, those sort of things. But the more in-depth analysis reporting items would be tied to larger plan updates. And I'm just trying to understand what that looks like so that we're not necessarily answering questions of like 1 year versus 4 or 5 based on housing if we don't know what that model consists of.
I think that's accurate, and maybe Kevin, you can pipe in here if you've got a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the specifically House Bill, I think it was House Bill 4006, and then it was underscored by passage of House Bill 2001, required annual reporting on housing production for cities with a population over 10,000. And initially it was a fairly limited, I can't remember if it was a multifamily, single family, but number of housing units produced in the community. House Bill 2001 expanded that to require reporting on middle housing types, as well as accessory dwelling unit production. So that's for the larger cities with population over 10,000.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, well, let's go into a quick poll, and then we want to, so we're going to do a poll on how often does it make sense for jurisdictions to be required to submit these reports. And then we're going to get into another discussion on what kind of information should they be including in the reports. So first, let's go to the poll. Ingrid, if you want to pull that up. So we have a poll here. Basically, how often do you think that cities should be required to report? You know, kind of what's the balance between reporting too infrequently and what's too burdensome? So every year, every 2 to 3 years, or every 4 to 5 years. And we'll give you all a few seconds to complete that. Okay, and I think we're probably getting close to all of the RAC members filling that out. So I think you can go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And it's sort of split evenly between the 3 options. So DLCD, you're going to have your.
Thanks for all the clear guidance there. Yeah.
You know, I think we do want to focus most of today on what should be included in those reports. But if anybody has any quick comments on, you know, why you chose what you did or what's important behind that number of years, would be curious to hear that. And I'm going to, we have a lot of hands up. So this is a hot topic. We might need to ask for more written comments on this, but I'll try to take comments from those that we've heard a little bit less from today. So let's go to Sarah first, and then Rob.
I was just going to say that I chose every year, but I really actually think that there should be different kinds of reports. There should be an annual report as well as a more thorough and robust report on a less than annual basis. And I think it'd probably be on a 2 to 3 year basis. So I just want to put that out there. I think, you know, an annual report on, I'm just brainstorming right here, but an annual report on actions taken, for example, and certain kind of measures that are not as labor intensive to put together would make sense. And keep the focus, right? I mean, we're really facing, I mean, everyone knows this, so I'm not trying to suggest otherwise, but we're facing an equity crisis and we're facing a climate crisis. I do a lot of work on climate adaptation, and you know, with the most recent climate reports that are coming out, the 2025 timeframe risks not being soon enough, which I think a lot of you already know. and the kind of magnitude of the problems that we're facing in the next, 10 to 20 years, and who's going to be facing kind of, just the age. There's now reports that show that, people who are under 60 are likely to face XYZ within their lifetime, people who are 40 and under, and they're really alarming. So I think we do need a regular annual reporting requirement to keep the forward momentum.
Thanks, Sarah. And Rob?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what Sarah said. I think coming from the local government perspective, having an annual report that's more qualitative, that says this is what we did this year, but having a report every 2 or 3 years that's maybe more quantitative, maybe more outcomes based, or a combination of inputs and outcomes, but that more formal report being every 2 or 3 years. I think every 5 years is almost, we'll forget how we did it the time before. So I think having it be every 2 or 3 years, there'll be that familiarity with it for staff, but it won't be like every year that we're having to do the bigger lift. And then having like the annual, just sort of like more qualitative, this is what we did this year, I think would also be a good thing.
Thanks, Rob. And I know there are a lot of other hands up, but we definitely want to do the next piece of this discussion. So let's go there. And then if we have time, we'll circle back. Or of course, please provide your thoughts in writing to elaborate on the reporting timeframes. Really appreciate that. So next, we want to get into a discussion on what should be included in these reports, which is really critical. What should be measured to show that cities are meeting the performance measures that we've been talking about today. And we're actually going to do this through a Jamboard exercise. And I am going to hand it over to Bianca Valdez on our facilitation team here at Kearns and West to help describe how we're going to do this.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to post a link in the Zoom chat to the Jamboard in a second. Let's see. And share my screen and give you guys a brief tutorial of how this works. So you can just follow the link that I just submitted in the chat, and you don't need to have a Google account to do this. And if you receive a message or like a pop-up window about a security concern, that you could just ignore that and click yes to go to the link. So we're going to be using sticky notes here to answer this question right in the middle. And to do that, I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen all right. I can get nods. Okay, great. So this bar on the left, there's a button that says sticky note. So if you just press that and type in your response and press save, it'll pop up. And to get out of this window, you can press cancel, or you could just click outside of the window, but it's pretty straightforward. So, and we ask that you don't use any of the other tools here. And if you have trouble accessing this Jamboard, you could chat the host or any of the other co-hosts in Zoom with your response, and we'll put it in here. So, yeah.
Great, thank you, Bianca. And feel free to put in as many sticky notes as you want, but we're basically asking, what kind of information do you think should be included in these reports that cities would be providing on whether it be an annual 2 to 3 year or 4 to 5 year type basis in order to show that they're advancing towards these climate and equity goals. So we'll give you a few minutes here to think on that and provide your responses. Hopefully those of you who are more kind of think by writing, this resonates with you. And then we'll have time for a few minutes of reflective discussion, but we'll just have a few moments of silence here while you all complete this, while you all provide your thoughts.
Sylvia, some people are getting a message saying there's too many people viewing and they're not able to type anything in right now.
Oh, that's unfortunate. And this is a new tool for us. So sorry if I thought there was a 50-person limit. So I'm surprised. We do have 51 participants, but maybe it's affecting more than that. If you are not able to provide your response, please just send a chat message to Ingrid or any other DLCD staff, and we'll make sure that we have your response for later. Sorry about that.
And staff, get out of it like I just did so other people can get in. If you're internet staff, close it. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe other RAC members, if you're already done, you can close it because we're going to be sharing it on the screen here.
Yeah, and maybe ask people to log out once they've put their comment in.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, just close the browser once you put your comment in, and you'll be able to see it on the Zoom platform where we're sharing it. Okay, lots of great ideas coming in. We'll give it another minute here. All right, well, we're getting to the spot where comments are overlapping on top of each other and it's looking amazing. So many great ideas. And I think people can continue to add their sticky notes or provide their ideas in the chat, but we'll open it up to discussion now. If anybody has any kind of reflections on what you see here, if you're able to read it, some of the long comments are a little bit harder to read on the screen. Feel free to raise your hand. Anything sticking out at you or just anything that you think is critical to say about what should be included in this reporting. And we can also go back to those hands that were up before that we didn't get a chance to get to.
Somebody mentioned there that, we should be, the reporting will depend on what the measures are. So, without really having a good grasp on what the measures and indicators are that have been set forth, I think, all these things are great, but I'm thinking without that being firmed up, these are things that would be helpful, but still it seems like it is kind of early on to talk about it. But one thought I did have was, and there's so many, it's hard to see, they're all coming in, but just in terms of, the engagement and also hearing from people, as well as more data sets that are derived from things like, a lot of the other things that have been mentioned here would be great. Actual outreach to community and getting community feedback too would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Bandana. I appreciate that. Others, Joshua, Skov, I know you're here as an alternate, but since we don't have a lot of hands up, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you. Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to go outside the chain of command. I'll make it really fast. I was just going to say a lot of these are outcomes, and then a lot of these are ways to get to those outcomes. I'm sure one of the things the performance measures group will wrestle with that distinction between ends and means. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Others? I know there were also a couple of hands up when we were talking about timing of reporting, and I can't remember who those people were off the top of my head. Mary Kyle?
Hi, I had trouble getting back to my screen that I can raise a hand in. I think this is what Bandana said, so I'm sorry, Bandana, if I'm repeating you. But this is a little abstract to me, both the how often things should be reported as well as what we how to measure them when we haven't gotten into the substance of what we're going to be, what the performance things are. So it just seems a little bit of horse before the cart, at least for me. I'm sure there's great ideas here that should lead us to what those actions are, what the local actions are that local governments should be taking in order to meet their greenhouse gas reduction goals, and then how often, and then that would lead to, for me, how often different parts of it should maybe be reported. Because I think it was Rob who earlier said, not everything makes sense to report annually. Maybe something does, maybe something every 5 years, but it's hard for me without knowing the specifics of the local actions to do this exercise, though I did it, and answer how frequent.
Thank you, Mary Kyle. Julie and then Paige.
Hi. One of my thoughts, just I think I saw some sticker here that said something about mapping. It keeps moving, but mapping where transportation investments are being made. And I know that in the Salem-Keizer area, for our MPO, they have done mapping overlaid over transportation disadvantaged data of where projects have been. And because projects are so expensive, you have to look at a long time frame to see how the geographic distribution of projects occurs. In a single 4-year period, you might only have a very small number of projects that are being advanced. And so maybe 1 year it focuses in one part of town, and then, within 10 years, maybe you've moved to another part of town.
Okay, thanks, Julie. And actually, just for some balance of speaking time, maybe Jay Raj and then Paige, if that's okay.
Thanks, Sylvia. I was just thinking, about measuring safety, not only from pedestrian, cars, truck crashes and fatalities, but also documenting, over policing from various law enforcement, bias and hate incidents. There's data from the Oregon Department of Justice that can inform safety. I think the over-reliance on police for traffic enforcement in the US has a serious impact on the freedom and mobility of Black and Brown people. And I think documenting this is important in regards to measuring safety.
Appreciate that, thank you. And Paige.
Yeah, just real quick, echoing a lot of what Sarah and Rob and Julie have said about the differences of progress that you have with capital improvements. Building sidewalks can take years, bike lanes can take years, having transit service improved takes about a year from route concept to implementation. But you have more near-term data that could be collected, or qualitative information such as community outreach, or outreach to your city staff about this whole process. I mean, I know a lot of staff are going to be completely unaware of this process. And so starting first with that knowledge bank and understanding what this is, having committees understand it, councils understand it, going through your solicitation and evaluation of projects. Those are all kind of qualitative things that I think can be done on an annual basis. But I think it's more reasonable to look at a 3 or 4 year time frame for some of those longer, the progress that it takes for you to actually get a sidewalk built. It's not going to be done annually with very much to see in percentage of progress. But I also think, I'm not sure if this is, honestly, if this venue is the best way to get the information that you guys are needing. I'm feeling a little ambiguity too with this process of us just kind of throwing out different performance measures. And what would be more useful for me is to understand the accessibility of data and what kind of data the cities are already gathering that is simple, that is consistent across the state. And so I think, it would be nice if the staff did an exercise outside of this group where they are working with city staff to understand that question. What are they currently gathering? What is consistent across the state? And then presenting that back to us so that we can understand what the gap is. Let's do our own gap analysis of data and the availability of data so that we're not ending this process completely far removed from what's actually happening on the ground level.
All right, thank you, Paige. And thanks everyone for participating. I think we could probably go ahead and take down the sticky wall for now, and we'll make sure this gets saved. And Bill, over to you with any next steps or final thoughts on this topic before we get into our wrap up.
Yeah, no, thank you, everybody. Obviously, lots to think about here. Yeah, our next step is going to be, trying to firm up these things. I think that, the couple people in the beginning made interesting points about having different types of reporting for different periods, and that's something I don't think we'd even thought about, and that makes a lot of sense. So that's why we have the RACs, to be able to bring innovative ideas to us and good things. So I think that's something that we'll consider internally, and I think a little further down the line we'll have some rule languages that that reflects some of these ideas, and I'm sure we'll go through some revisions on that, but that'll be later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. All right, then I think over to Kevin Young to just review some next steps for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting, and then we'll wrap up with some closing thoughts from Commissioner Warren. So Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think we had a few slides. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. You got it. So yeah, just the road ahead here. So thanks again for a great meeting. I really love that tool. That was, wow, we got so much input in such a short amount of time. So we will look at that in more detail. But so next meeting, March is RAC 5. We'll be bringing you back draft Division 44 rules for review. We'll also just start to roll out some of the concepts for climate-friendly areas. That second package of actions. Really, what we're calling maybe the bundle there is the minimum requirements conversation. We'll be bringing concepts to you the March 5th meeting, and we'll also be reviewing work to date. After that, we're going to take a couple months of a break, although there will be other things going on, community conversations, work group meetings, including the performance measures group. Thanks to everyone who's expressed interest in that. Potential focus group meetings and so on. And then from June to November, we're moving into that other side. So we've talked about scenario planning, that side of the puzzle. We will be bringing that back, but also we'll roll into transportation and land use planning changes, those 6 items that I shared at the beginning of the meeting. So next slide, please. And then just a reminder of our upcoming community conversations. So at this point, thank you to Evan Manvel, who has done all of the legwork on putting this together. We have dates for all of them. The times, for the most part, are to be determined. But if you're wanting to attend, you might just put a note on your calendar. Portland Metro, March 24. Corvallis and Albany are doing a joint meeting on April 6th. Similar to Rogue Valley, Medford and Middle Road Grants Pass are doing a combined meeting April 13. Bend, May 11th, Eugene Springfield, May 19th, and then Salem Kaiser on the 25th of May. So all community residents are invited and welcome to attend. The goal here is to provide the community with an overview of what we're doing, answer questions, and then receive input from all attendees. So we hope that some of you will be able to attend, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And Commissioner Warren, over to you with some final thoughts.
Thank you, everyone. What a rich meeting that was. You know, I was tasked with attempting to add some personal validations at the end of this conversation. And I have 2 pages of notes to share with you, and I'm going to spare you from that because I think you all were part of the conversation today and learned a lot. And we're also able to communicate a lot of great ideas. And so we really appreciate your hard work and your continued guidance. This is really hard work and it can be daunting. And I just want to give everyone kind of a message of hope because like many of you, I've worked in climate for a very long time. And at times it can be such a daunting thing that you almost lose hope. But when you're part of meetings like this and you see how many great people are truly giving their lives to tackling this issue, that's what gives me hope. That's what helps me to continue to do the important work that we're doing. So please take a moment for yourself and acknowledge how much you're giving and how important it is that you're doing that. And then, so staff is going to be pouring over all this information, and it's a lot of information. And luckily, we have an amazing staff at the LCDC, or excuse me, DLCD, who's going to be taking this on and bringing the information back to us for our next meeting, which is on my birthday, March 29th. And I look forward to seeing you all there. So thanks again for a great meeting. And I can't wait to do some more work with you all.
Thank you, Commissioner, and happy early birthday. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your participation. This was a great meeting. So much wonderful input. And meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thanks, everybody.